Welcome to another deep dive, listeners. Today we're taking a look at the journey of Christianity. And it's a story full of twists and turns you might not expect. We're going to be drawing insights from the Urantia book, specifically paper 195 after Pentecost, to shed light on how this movement went from a small group to a global force.
It's fascinating, isn't it? The text really paints a picture of a movement that faced a surprising amount of resistance, especially considering where it started.
Yeah, you'd think it would have taken off like wildfire right in its birthplace, wouldn't you? What made those early years so difficult for Christianity, according to the book?
Well, it seems the people of that time and place, they were deeply rooted in tradition. And this new perspective, even though it came from within, was seen as quite radical. They were being asked to change their whole way of thinking about their relationship with God, much more personal, much more direct, and that's a big leap for anyone.
It really makes you wonder then, how did Christianity go from those shaky early years to becoming such a major force throughout history?
Well, it's important to look at the bigger picture. At the time, the Roman Empire was vast, but there was also a lot of unrest. People were worn down by constant wars, disillusioned with their old gods. There was a real hunger for something more, something deeper.
So it's almost like Christianity appeared at the perfect time, offering a fresh perspective when people were ready for it. But it wasn't just about faith, right? From what I understand, the Urantia book suggests early Christianity had a much broader vision.
Exactly. The text describes a movement that wanted to impact every aspect of life. They weren't just content with changing individual beliefs. They wanted to reshape art, law, government, even everyday interactions between people. This wasn't just a new religion, it was a completely new way of life they were proposing.
Which I imagine created some pushback. That's a lot of change to throw at people all at once, even if they're searching for something new.
It certainly did. That's where people like Paul, with his knack for strategy, come in. The book talks about how he realized they needed to meet people where they were at. So he embraced certain aspects of Greek philosophy, finding common threads between those ideas and the teachings of Christianity.
So it was a bit of a balancing act, holding on to the core of Christianity while also making it accessible, even appealing to those unfamiliar with it.
Exactly. The book even mentions how those early Christians would point out similarities between their faith and popular beliefs of the time, like Mithraism, which, for those who don't know, was big with Roman soldiers, emphasize this personal journey of transformation through rituals and the idea of good overcoming evil. Sounds familiar, right?
Wow, I had no idea how much those early belief systems were intertwined, influencing each other, shaping the religious scene of the time. But this blending, wasn't it risky?
It's a good question, and the Urantia book doesn't shy away from the compromises that were made. But to really get to the bottom of this theological balancing act, we need to dive into how Greek thought and Roman rule each played their part in shaping this new faith.
It's wild to think about this blend we've got, right? Hebrew prophecy, Greek philosophy, all happening under the watchful eye of Roman power. You can't help but wonder how each of these forces nudged Christianity toward what it would become.
That's something the Urantia book digs into, that dynamic. You see, you've got the Greeks with their love of a good debate, their logic. They really shaped how those early Christians explained what they believed.
It's like Greek philosophy gave them the vocabulary, the tools to really have those early theological conversations.
You got it. And they weren't shy about tackling the big questions, were they? The nature of Jesus, his relationship to God, even the nature of God himself. The book actually points to Athanasius as a key figure here. He was a bishop, very vocal about defending the idea of Jesus being both fully God and fully human.
Oh, against those who wanted to downplay that, right?
Exactly. It wasn't just an academic exercise for them either. They were shaping the very core of a whole new faith.
It makes me think about those passionate philosophical debates you still see today.
Yeah.
People digging into those big, heady concepts, trying to understand existence itself. But back then, the stakes were incredibly high.
Absolutely. It's what the Urantia book calls theological trading. Those early Christians, they were walking a tightrope, engaging with Greek thought, even borrowing some of their words and ideas, but they couldn't lose the heart of Jesus' message.
Finding that common ground without losing what made Christianity unique. Got any examples of how this theological trading played out?
Take the concept of the logos. Greeks use that term, right? Meant this sort of universal reason, a principle that governed everything. But those early Christian thinkers, drawing from the Gospel of John, they said, hey, that logos, that's Jesus. They presented him as the embodiment of divine reason, bridging the gap between God and humanity.
Yeah.
Genius, Right.
Talk about bridging worlds, but what about the Romans? They were all about law and order. How did their influence fit into all of this?
Now, that's where it gets really interesting. Romans were practical, right? They weren't as interested in abstract theological debates. They wanted to know, how does this new faith line up with our laws, our social order?
So did Christianity have to bend a bit to fit in, to be accepted in Rome?
In a way, yes. See, the Urantia book points out how the Romans, they believed in natural law, the idea that there's a divine order built into the universe. And that made them open to the idea of one God who set those laws in motion.
So their existing beliefs actually made them receptive to certain aspects of Christianity. It wasn't just about changing hearts and minds. It was about aligning with how they already saw the world working.
Precisely. And as Christianity gained ground within the Roman Empire, guess what? It started influencing Roman law, their social customs, things like charity, compassion. Those Christian principles began to change how they treated the poor, the marginalized.
It's pretty amazing, this once persecuted faith weaving its way into the fabric of the Roman Empire, eventually becoming its official religion. But I imagine that kind of widespread acceptance brought its own set of challenges, didn't it?
You're spot on. And the Urantia book doesn't shy away from the complexities of this shift. While Rome's support definitely helped spread Christianity far and wide, it might have led to some diluting of the original message. As the faith adapted to its new position of influence, it started to resemble the very structures it initially challenged.
A tale as old as time. But what I find fascinating is how the Urantia book presents this time of growth and adaptation as just the setup for a much darker chapter in Christian history, the Dark Ages. Tell me more about that. Dark Ages, it's ominous, isn't it? Makes you think everything just stopped, like the lights went out on all that progress.
There's a funny thing about that because while Rome, which was so connected to Christianity by then, crumbled, well, that's when the seeds of the Dark Ages were really planted, you know?
Wait, so you're saying Rome's decline actually influenced what happened to Christianity during that time? How so?
Think about it. As the Roman Empire broke apart, the Christian world fractured too. The Urantia book describes how, without that unifying force, Christianity kind of pulled back, focused more on rituals, on dogma, almost like a way to hold on to its identity and all that chaos.
A spiritual hibernation almost, protecting the core while the world outside went haywire.
Exactly. And the book suggests this inward focus, which might seem limiting, it was actually key to Christianity's survival. By consolidating its own power, emphasizing tradition, the church weathered the storm.
But didn't that create a gap between what people were experiencing in their lives and the church's often rigid rules?
You've hit on a tension that the Urantia book points out again and again throughout history. The church offered stability, yeah, but it also sometimes lost sight of that compassionate, outward-looking spirit that was at the heart of Jesus' teachings.
How does the book reconcile that?
It highlights this fascinating parallel movement, mysticism. While the church became more about doctrine, about hierarchy, the mystics, they focused on direct experience of the divine, through contemplation, through serving others.
So even in that supposed darkness, there were still these flickers of light, searching for new ways to connect to the divine. But what about later on? How did Christianity handle the shift from the Dark Ages to the Renaissance and everything that came after?
Now that is where it gets really interesting. The Urantia book says that the same things that made the church turn inward during the Dark Ages actually laid the foundation for it to come roaring back during the Renaissance.
I don't quite follow.
Okay, think about it. For centuries, the church had been preserving knowledge, translating texts, developing ways of thinking. So when intellectual curiosity was reborn in the Renaissance, the church was ready to engage. They had the resources, the structure.
Like they'd become the caretakers of the very knowledge that would spark this new wave of questioning.
Precisely. And as those new scientific discoveries challenged old beliefs, Christianity hit a crossroads. Cling to dogma or find new ways to bridge faith and reason. And honestly, that brings us to a question that couldn't be more relevant today. Can a faith born so long ago, rooted in tradition, resistant to change, can it really thrive in a world that's all about science, technology, and a secular way of seeing things?
It's the question, isn't it?
It really is. The Urantia book doesn't sugarcoat it. It acknowledges the valid criticisms of organized religion, especially the tendency to get bogged down in dogma and power struggles.
So where do we go from here? Is there a way forward for faith in our modern age of reason and science?
The book suggests that the answer isn't about rejecting science or clinging to outdated interpretations, but about rediscovering the core of Jesus' message. It's about shifting from blind faith to a faith that's informed by reason, by compassion, and by a deep understanding of how interconnected we all are.
So less about picking sides, more about building bridges between those two worlds.
Exactly. Because true faith, it's not about blind acceptance, right? It's about asking those tough questions, seeking truth, and being open to letting our beliefs evolve as we do.
That is a powerful message, and it feels so incredibly relevant today, especially as we deal with these huge, complex issues. Climate change, social injustice. It makes you think, how can our faith inspire us to act, to make a real difference, to create a better world for everyone?
And that, I believe, is at the very heart of what the Urantia book is trying to tell us. It's not about hiding from the world, but engaging with it. Letting our faith be that guiding force as we try to embody the love, compassion, and service that Jesus exemplified.
That feels like the perfect note to wrap up this deep dive on. We've journeyed from the surprising beginnings of Christianity to its intricate evolution across cultures and time.
As you continue to explore these ideas, just remember, the most important journey is the one we take within. That journey of seeking truth, cultivating compassion, and living in a way that reflects the best of what we believe in.
Until next time, keep asking those big questions, keep searching for those aha moments, and keep diving deep, listeners.